Let me tell you about the dumbest business decision in modern tech history. Then let me tell you why it wasn't dumb at all. It was worse than dumb. It was rational. For decades, one company owned silicon, not owned it like a stock ticker, owned it like a landlord owns your building. Every processor in every serious computer on Earth traced back to one name: Intel. And Intel didn't just make the best chips. Intel set the calendar, a rigid little rhythm called tick-tock. New architecture one year, shrink it down the next. Tick-tock, like clockwork, because that was the whole point. Predictable dominance, forever. And then, sometime around 2014, the clock just stopped ticking properly. Intel hit a wall trying to shrink their chips down to 10 nanometers. And when I say wall, I don't mean a small delay, a quiet little hoops. Give us 6 more months. I mean years of delays. The kind of delays where competitors start quietly updating their PowerPoint slides. Then, just as they limped their way through 10 nanometers, they hit basically the same wall again, trying to get to 7 nanometers. Half a decade of the most powerful chip company on the planet, essentially standing still while the rest of the industry kept walking. Now, normally, I tell you to sit back and relax for this one. Grab your mate, get comfortable. This is just a nerdy manufacturing story. But no, stick with me here, because there's a plot twist coming, and it involves a phone in your pocket, a guy who said no to Steve Jobs, and a Taiwanese engineer who basically invented an entire industry out of spite. This isn't a boring hardware story. This is a story about ego, and it ends with the king of silicon paying tens of billions of dollars to try and become relevant again. So let's actually understand what happened here, because I promise you, it's not what you think. Here's the reframe, and this is the part that trips everybody up. You assume this is a story about Intel getting worse. It's not really. Intel didn't suddenly forget how to make chips. This is a story about somebody else inventing an entirely different way of doing business, one so counterintuitive that Intel probably laughed at it for a decade, right up until it ate their lunch, their dinner, and most of their market cap. That somebody is a man named Morris Chang, and in 1987, Chang founded a company called TSMC, the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company, built on an idea that sounded, at the time, almost stupid. He said, "We will never design our own chips, ever. We will only manufacture chips designed by other companies. That's it, that's the whole business." Think about how backwards that sounds in an industry obsessed with owning the whole stack, designing your own chip and building it yourself, so nobody else profits off your genius. Chang looked at that model and said, "No thanks, that's actually the problem. Because the second you both design chips and manufacture chips, every single one of your manufacturing clients is secretly also your competitor. Why would NVIDIA hand their most sensitive chip designs to a company that might just steal the good ideas for its own product line next year? They wouldn't, not fully, not with total trust. So Chang built what's called a pure play foundry. No competing designs, no conflicts of interest, no ulterior motives. Just hand us your blueprint. We will manufacture it better than anyone else on Earth, and we will never ever compete with you. It's such a boring pitch. It's also one of the most brilliant business models of the last 50 years because it turned TSMC into something rare in this industry. A company that every single chip designer could actually trust. Apple could trust it, AMD could trust it, NVIDIA could trust it, and that trust, that one unglamorous decision to just focus on manufacturing and shut up about designing anything themselves, quietly built the foundation for the most important company in the modern semiconductor industry. While everyone else was busy trying to do everything, Chang built a company that only had to do one thing, extremely well, forever. Now let's talk about the moment that really lit the fuse. 2006. Steve Jobs and Apple are working on a little device that's about to become the original iPhone, and they need somebody to manufacture the chip inside it, so they go to the biggest, most obvious name in the business: Intel. And Intel's CEO at the time, a guy named Paul Otellini, says no. Not out of arrogance exactly, at least not the cartoon villain kind. It was a spreadsheet decision. Intel looked at the projected volumes for this weird new phone thing and decided the math didn't work. Development costs too high. Expected sales too speculative, not worth the investment. A perfectly rational, perfectly reasonable, historically catastrophic decision. Because Apple didn't just shrug and give up on making the iPhone. They went and found manufacturing partners in Asia instead. And eventually, that hunt led them straight into the arms of TSMC. Now sit with that for a second. Intel said no to manufacturing the chip that would go on to sell over 2 billion units and reshape the entire global economy around a device that lives in your pocket. And TSMC's. And every dollar Apple poured into TSMC after that decision helped fund an absolutely massive acceleration in TSMC's research and development. Intel didn't just lose a client. Intel personally, single-handedly, financed its future rival's rise out of an abundance of caution over one spreadsheet. You cannot write a better cautionary tale than that if you tried. So now we get to the deep dive, the part where two completely different philosophies of running a chip company collide, and only one of them survives with its dignity intact. Intel's whole identity was built on doing everything under one roof. Design the chip, manufacture the chip, sell the chip, control every single piece of the process. On paper, that sounds like an advantage. Total control, total quality assurance, nobody else's mistakes to worry about. In reality, it made Intel enormous, slow, and bloated, weighed down trying to be excellent at two entirely different, difficult jobs at once: chip design and chip manufacturing, instead of mastering just one. TSMC, meanwhile, had the luxury of obsession. One job, manufacturing. That's the entire company's personality. No distractions managing a design team's ego. No internal politics between the designers and the factory floor. Just relentless, singular focus on making the manufacturing process itself as advanced as physically possible. And by the time we hit 2020, that difference in focus turned into a difference in raw technological capability. While Intel was still stuck, painfully, delaying its 7nm chips yet again, TSMC was already mass-producing 5nm chips, successfully, at scale, for paying customers. Let that sink in for a second, because the numbers matter here. Smaller nanometer measurements means smaller transistors, which means more power, more efficiency, more performance squeezed into the same physical space. TSMC wasn't just a little bit ahead of Intel at this point. They had lapped them. The company that used to set the industry's calendar was now watching a foundry from Taiwan, one that refused to even design its own chips, define the cutting edge instead. And here's the counterintuitive twist, the part that should make every overconfident industry leader a little nauseous. Intel didn't lose because they tried to do too little. They lost because they tried to do too much. Owning the entire process, top to bottom, design and manufacturing, wasn't the flex everybody assumed it was. It was the anchor. Meanwhile, the company that deliberately limited its own ambition, that said, we will only ever do one thing, became the most important manufacturing company on the planet precisely because it refused to be distracted by anything else. Today, TSMC doesn't just lead the industry, they dominate it. Something in the range of 30 to 33% of the entire global cloud and chip foundry market runs through them, comfortably ahead of every other name you'd recognize. Every iPhone chip, most high-end graphics cards, huge portions of the world's advanced computing power, all funneling through factories in Taiwan that Intel had every opportunity to build the equivalent of, and simply chose not to. So what's Intel doing about all this now? Well, they're doing the thing that every declining empire eventually does. They're admitting, quietly, expensively, that the old model failed, and trying to buy their way back into relevance. Under CEO Pat Gelsinger, Intel has been pouring absolutely staggering amounts of money into building out its own foundry business, essentially trying to become TSMC, years and years after TSMC already won that exact game. We're talking tens of billions of dollars in new investment, including a mega manufacturing site in Ohio alone valued at around $20 billion. One single site, $20 billion. Just to try to claw back some of the manufacturing credibility they let walk out the door decades ago over a spreadsheet decision about a phone nobody at the time believed in. And look, I want you to notice the modern mirror here, because this pattern isn't unique to chips, and it isn't unique to Intel. This is basically the origin story of every dying giant. A company gets so big, so dominant, so convinced of its own permanence, that it starts saying no to things. No, that market's too small. No, that idea is too weird. No, that customer's volume doesn't justify the investment. And somewhere out there, always, there's a smaller, hungrier, more focused competitor waiting to say yes instead. You've watched this exact movie before, just with different props. Blockbuster said no to streaming. Kodak said no to digital. And Intel, the undisputed king of silicon for half a century, said no to a phone company's chip order because the math on a spreadsheet didn't look good enough that quarter. Every single one of these stories starts the exact same way, not with stupidity, with confidence. Confidence dressed up as caution, right up until it becomes the single most expensive word a company ever says. So next time some massive, dominant company tells you a market's too small to bother with, or an idea's too risky to fund, remember Paul Otellini's spreadsheet. Somewhere, right now, some smaller company is saying yes to that exact same opportunity. And in about 15 years, we'll be making a very similar video about whoever said no this time. Anyway, that's Intel for you. Spent 50 years building an empire, then handed the crown jewels to a company that succeeded specifically by refusing to be Intel. My mate's cold again. Feels appropriate.